Welcome back to BaldHeaded Metal, and welcome back to another album recommendation, this time around for 5 thrash records. Now, I want to do it a little bit differently. In the past, I like to write out a whole script and kind of go by a script and make sure I get every detail right. And I realized to me it doesn't sound very organic. It doesn't really get my emotions across of what I really felt about these albums. I think it's more important than finding out the exact date it was kind of released. So what I decided to do is name five thrash records. I'm not going to say they're absolute best, but 5 thrash records that you absolutely have to hear because they are just top-notch heavy metal. And I'm going to start with a band that apparently not everybody knows, and that's Warbringer, with their album Walking Into Nightmare, which came out in 2009. I love Warbringer. It's a band I discovered when I first saw Exodus, which was my first concert in 2007. Exodus was headlining with Goat Whore, Arsis, and Warbringer. Warbringer just came with the energy, and I could not believe how good the music was. Especially their second album, it really brings back that Demolition Hammer. It's a deep cut for metal fans. If you ever heard of the band Demolition Hammer, some of the other bands like Sadus and just old school 80s bands that, were only around there for a couple albums, Warbringer was inspired by all of these guys, but just did it so much better. First of all, the production was on point. Songs like Living in the Whirlwind and Severed Reality or Pray for Death just really brought a melodic and a thrashy side to the songs. They had really nice solos and kind of bluesy solos, but at the same time really rough riffs and that kind of old school production sound with that screeching kind of vocals that the guy would also bring within Warbringer. I think this band is totally underrated in the resurgence of thrash metal that kind of happened in the mid to late 2000s. I think they were one of the best ones, along with Vector and other bands out there that I've mentioned before, and I thought it's time to highlight this band a little bit more so you guys can check out a band that perhaps you've never heard. With the second band, if you haven't heard of this band, I would be really kind of, really surprised because anybody who's remotely into heavy metal heard of Sepultura, and the specific album I'm talking about here is Beneath the Remains, which came out in 1989. Now that album, not everybody actually knows. Everybody knows Arise, KSAD, Root Bloody Roots, but not a lot of people mention Beneath the Remains, and that is the pinnacle of Sepultura with Max Cavalera and Igor Cavalera with Andres Keser. They really produced a record which, first of all, in many ways was the predecessor to death metal, which a lot of people don't know about. They've been credited as being kind of creating almost the sound or beginning sounds of death metal, because this record is just brutal. Sepultura was known for speed. They weren't exactly the most technical band out there, but their speed, their energy, their aggression, and just the way they would switch up some of their songs just absolutely had me, especially the song like Stronger Than Hate on that album. Oh my God, when it gets into a solo about a minute and 2 minutes in there, it just gives me just goosebumps every single time I listen to it. There's songs like Inner Self, Beneath the Remains, Slaves of Pain. There is not even a bad song on this album. It's as good as Rust in Peace. It's as good as Master of Puppets of Rain and Blood. It's an absolutely classic record that I think any thrash fan, death metal fan should definitely check out. Moving on here, it's also a classic band, but for some reason, not a lot of people mention this band, and I think they should mention it more. And that's Overkill, and with their album Horoscope, which came out in 1991. Now, a little bit of information about this, that Bobby Blitz, kind of the energy and soul of the band, he was inspired by Bruce Dickinson, and he actually kind of tried to sing in his beginning albums, ended up hurting his voice. He had to actually learn how to sing and changed up his vocals. And he created this kind of a thrash sound, which is very unique. Nobody sounds like Bobby Blitz. He has a completely unique sound. Not to mention the sound of the band is nobody has been able to replicate or even try to replicate Overkill. And in good records, Overkill, like Horoscope, with songs like Coma, Infectious, Thanks for Nothing, which I love, Horoscope, New Machine, Frankenstein. It's just another killer record from beginning to end. They have a lot of great records, but that's always been one of my favorites along with Years of Decay. Overkill, especially when you see them live, is one of the most brutal bands I've ever seen, taking black metal and death metal into account. I've seen Slayer, I've seen all these bands. I've never been in a more aggressive mosh pit than I've been with Overkill. So much so I've gotten a black eye at Overkill concerts. But I always loved this band. I always loved this energy of this band. And Bobby Blitz always been kind of, to me, just such a hardworking artist that I think it's only his time due to kind of spotlight him more. And their latest records are 1,000 times better than anything Megadeth, Slayer, or Metallica produced. So I think definitely get into Overkill, and especially the album Horoscope. Moving on to my favorite thrash metal band of all time, that's Exodus. I discovered Exodus and their resurgence with Steve Souza when they had that 2004, I believe, Temple of the Damned album. And they really came back strong with that album, and the album was fantastic. But it wasn't until I heard Atrocity Exhibition 8, which came out in 2007, it just blew me away. I could not believe what I was hearing and how good the album was. It was giving me 10-minute epic thrash metal songs with just pure blistering speed Gary Holt is known for. Lee Atlas on his solos and guitars and leads, and Tom Hunting on the guitar, Rob Duke's vocals. I love Steve Souza, the Zetro Souza, but holy crap, Rob Dukes really brought the aggression to the music. It was songs like Children of a Worthless God, Iconoclasm, Atrocity Big Exhibition A, Garden of Bleeding, Funeral Hymn. There's just such epic, timeless riffs on this album. If you're remotely into any kind of aggressive metal music, whether it be death, melodic death, black metal, thrash metal, you have to listen to this album. You're gonna discover some of the most insane riffs, I think, on this particular record. Now, the last one I want to talk about is a newer band, and unfortunately, we don't know if this band is gonna come back because of a death of one of the members, and that's Power Trip. I want to specifically recommend their album Nightmare Logic that came out in 2017. That album was just critically acclaimed by every single reviewer when it first came out because it did this kind of crossover thrash sound like DRI and Stormtroopers of Death, which I don't know how to put it. The songs themselves are not these epics. They're not the most intricate, but there's something about their sound. You would think they're, first of all, from the 80s. When you listen to them, you did not think they're from 2017. You listen to songs like Executioner's Axe or Nightmare Logic, Waiting Around to Die. They're brutal, they're heavy, they have that punk influence in them. They have just the attitude. Their music videos, I love that whole like old school filter they put in their music videos. They absolutely deserve more attention. Every single album this band also released, they have, I think, 2-3 albums. It's been just absolutely fantastic. I really, really, really hope that this band reunites because it seems like from a critic standpoint and a fan standpoint, just everybody was in love with this band. And they have that Texas attitude that Pantera kind of had back in the 80s and 90s. So Power Trip would be my definitely even above Atrocity Exhibition A because not a lot of people know about Power Trip. I put them at the top of this list. And that's why I mentioned them last. Guys, I would like to hear from you if you have any recommendations for a thrash record that you think everybody should hear. I have other like 40 or 50 that I would recommend. It was a hard kind of decision which ones to start with for this list. And I would also want to see if you guys know any of these bands and if you heard them and if you check them out. I would love to hear what you think about these particular albums. With that being said, hopefully you discovered some music today with this video that might be really interesting for you. And hopefully you enjoy it. Metal music is meant to be shared. Music in general is meant to be shared. And metal is not a genre that has a lot of eyes on it. So I always want to spotlight it when I give it a chance, even if it's 10 people who watch this video. Guys, make sure you enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy some metal. Take care of yourselves and stay safe.